So, hello, welcome. Thank you for joining me in this conversation today. If y'all want to give some introductions.
I am Rooster Martinez, spoken word poet, San Antonio, Texas. Chibbi.
Yeah, my name's Chibbi. I'm also in San Antonio, spoken word artist, poet, person extraordinaire.
And of course, y'all know me, Tamara Al-Qaisi-Coleman. I am the editor-in-chief of Defunct Magazine, and I am so excited to be here with Chibbi and Rooster in conversation with their new book, Contra, Texas Poets Speak Out. It's a collection from Texas poets talking about activism, talking about voting, talking about our civic duty and turning this damn state blue finally, right? Right. My copy is well-loved. I read through this book twice before getting on this call because a lot of my friends are in here. So of course I wanted to reread and give moments to their works, but also y'all's pieces I took extra moments on because I do want to talk about your contributions since I'm a craft nerd. So we're going to talk about craft a little bit. But I first wanted to start out with what came first, being an activist or being a poet for both of you?
Chibbi, you first.
All right. I would have to say the poet part, but not very far off. Not very far off, because I first really started writing, like seriously writing, when I was in college, living in Austin. So it was kind of, when you live in Austin, Texas, it's kind of hard to like not be aware with what's happening in the world around you, you know. But my writing definitely started more about as like me talking about myself and my life and love and all the cheesy shit that we write about when we first start writing. But then as I started getting more and more connected to the world around me, I realized that everything is politics, you know, and everything we do and we talk about influences those around us. So it became more and more of a duty, you know, responsibility to use my writing to kind of, you know, influence and lift up stories that are often untold. And now it's like, it's hard for me to separate myself from that. Now I'm like, how do I go back to writing a love poem? It just feels so trivial sometimes when it's like, I'm writing a poem about my dog when I could be writing about, you know, everything that's happening in this world. But trying to find that balance is interesting. But yeah, it's almost impossible to break them now.
I completely understand, especially in like a post or like the Trump era, like politics is really like the basis of everything now, right? It's and I don't think it's even politics. I think it's just like human rights. Like this is the time when we're seeing like a resurgence of the civil rights movement within BLM, within everything. And it's just like now it feels weird to separate art and activism. But Rooster, I would really love to hear your origin story.
Sure. For me, it was very similar to Chibbi's. I started as a spoken word poet 10 years ago, and I think that initial just beginning of writing and using your voice and just creating ideas and being, you know, fighting the fears to get on a stage and start sharing began first, and then ultimately being out in the community. And I did write some political poems at the time, just because a lot of my influences were, you know, Public Enemy, Tupac, you know, on down the line, Joni Mitchell and stuff. So that kind of was always in my work. And I would get asked by community groups, you know, grassroots organizations to like come and read or, you know, help out. And then through poetry, I found greater links into the community at large. And San Antonio specifically has a really rich history of community activism going back to the civil rights movement, a lot that maybe most major cities or people outside of here don't know about. So it's always been something I cherish as it's kind of developed the activist side of things. So
that's awesome. And I also wanted to talk to y'all about like balancing those hats, you know, of being an activist and being a poet, and how do you balance those things? How do they influence each other?
Sure. Yeah, like I said, you know, like for me, it's almost impossible to separate them. which then can kind of create it like a double-edged sword, where it's like, I feel the need to speak out about what's happening in the world, but sometimes that can become so overwhelming that I have to tune out from what's happening in the world. And then I no longer feel the need to create, it's this kind of balance of like, how much do you plug in for the sake of the work, but then how much do you allow yourself to unplug for the sake of your own mental health,
I think for me, I try to avoid juggling as much as possible, and I just sort of try to wear them all at the same time, or I don't know, I guess for me, it's very difficult to separate them often. And I have to like force myself to. So because like you said, like because of the political climate, because of human rights violations that have been happening and tragedies unfolding daily, it's like sometimes I have to write about my dog, or I have to write about, just things that bring me happiness, or just things that are not poetry, or that aren't have nothing to do with politics. I think I just from my influences, like you can write politically and you can write beautifully and you can write about a country or a place or a person, and you can still do it in such a way that it's not like I set out to write political poems. They just sort of manifest that way. Same thing with like, Gloria Zandua kind of got me into that idea of just, the body's political, the country's political, like anything you write about can be political. So I just kind of stick to that formula, I guess.
Gloria Anzaldúa, I love her. I did want to like talk about Move Texas. You mentioned it in the email. That is the organization that y'all put all the proceeds for this book to, and I wanted to talk about them and what they do and kind of why you chose that cause.
We had like a list of different places, and we really had we created the book in quite a rush, so we were really just making lists all over the place and thinking about it in terms of like poets we would reach out to, or that we would have in the anthology, and then another separate list of organizations nationwide that are out pro-democracy, trying to get people out to vote. We looked at a number of them, but with Move Texas specifically, they were originally founded as a student organization at the University of Texas, San Antonio, which really spoke to us. They haven't really been around too long, and they've grown exponentially here in the state of Texas, and we really love that. I know, like for a brief second when we started the anthology, at first we were thinking about like nationwide poets, but Chibbi, was like, no, let's really focus on, Texas and the idea of it turning blue. And I was like, that's great. And I think that really factored into Move Texas being the organization that we partnered with.
Yeah, I love how their work is specifically geared towards energizing and mobilizing underrepresented communities, but also the youth, and I think that's a big part. Like, I'm just going to go out there and say it, like that's a huge part of what's going to shift this state in that direction, is the young people that are coming up, living through all this, that have been living through all this over the past 4 years and then some, that are now like coming of voting age, and just really instilling the importance of being a part of that process from such a young age. Because like, if I have to call myself out, I didn't vote in a presidential election for the first time until I think it was 4 years ago. Yeah, until 4 years ago, because the one, I was too young. Then I was out of the country for Obama's, and I just didn't do the paperwork. And then I don't even know why I didn't vote in Obama's second one. And so if I had understood the power that a vote has at a younger age, I would have put more effort and emphasis into making sure that I got out there to vote. So I think that's what's so important about what Move Texas is doing, is they're really gearing their efforts towards younger voters. So because you see it statistically, the percentage of people in the younger demographic is so much lower than the percentage of the older generations, just because they've lived through so much more and they understand the power of it. I have spreadsheets to prove this. so yeah, it really is in the young people.
Same thing. Like, I didn't vote until 2016. Like, it was also because the first time I was old enough to vote was right after the 2000 election, which got stolen. I was really disenfranchised with it. Like, I just couldn't do it. And I also was really, even though I was very politically like motivated and I understood like local politics, and sometimes I'd vote for local politics, but nationally, I really felt like, you know, Democrats and Republicans had to earn my vote. And I really felt like none of them ever spoke to me or to the, you know, individuals I knew or cared about or loved. So it was something I never really cared about until 2016 with Hillary and Trump. And I was just like, I have to vote now. Like, there's no other alternative. And we saw the results of that. But kind of going off what Chibbi said, like, I think a large part of it too was this idea that like, voting to me now isn't just even me individually going and casting my vote. It's kind of what this book represents, which is, it's like, no, it's all of us sort of really, you know, coming together, banding together, and mobilizing communities and individuals for themselves, but also for those who can't vote for whatever reason. And that's what's kind of really broke open my whole perspective on it.
I really love that idea that that a political party has to try and earn your vote like in a certain way, but I feel like we've kind of evolved past that point where that's no longer a luxury that we can have. Like you said, like the 2000 election was stolen. Bush is like the one domino that kind of tipped it over, and then we've gotten to this point where it's not even about the political parties anymore. It's not about whether you're blue or red or financial policies or whatever it is. It's literally about human rights and being able to be a BIPOC person in this country comfortably and in any way, shape, or form. Being a woman and having like control of my body, like et cetera, et cetera. It's not even politics. It's literally just being able to live as freely as the land of the free promise, right? You did this entire thing in 2 weeks. I really want to talk about that process from going from having the idea, the genesis, to reaching out to these poets, and how you chose which poets to reach out to and how you got it all together and got FlowerSong to get on board so quickly. Like, how did this process look like for you guys?
Yeah. Can I tell the story, Chibbi?
Go. It all started when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and I had a meltdown, and so did Rooster. You take it from there, Rooster.
So it was that week that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. Our week leading up to her passing, I had been really, really struggling with quarantine, and we had already been like 6 months in, and it looked like there was no end in sight, and the election was looming, and I just feel like there was this buildup of stress happening. And I take quarantine really seriously. I only go out to get groceries, and that's pretty much it. So I just been here, and I just went on like a mushroom binge for like 5 days because I just had to get out of my mind.
Yeah.
Which was fantastic. So I started having all these ideas. It culminated in the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Chibbi actually went out of town that day. And I was, you know, really high as hell. And I just texted him. I'm like, I got a brilliant idea. Text me. And he was just completely broken, like many people, about her passing. So I didn't hear from him for like 4 or 5 days. He calls me and he's like, hey man, you texted me, you know, what's going on? And I was like, I have this idea. It was really just drug induced. I don't know if you'd even like it, but here's what it is. And he was like, we're doing it. I was like, fantastic. And it really became an immediate time crunch because initially it was like, if we do this, we have to do it as soon as possible because early voting started, I want to say October 9th or 3rd. Of the year. So we had like 2 weeks to just get people, to get a publisher, to get anyone involved. Luckily, we had a really good relationship with Edward Vidal from FlowerSong already. And I just was like, let me just ask him. I don't know, you know, we got to ask him what the logistics are, how long it'll take. We wanted it published by election date or before. So we reached out to him, and luckily at every single turn, whether it was FlowerSong, whether it was Gemini Inc. also helping us out, each individual poet we reached out to, they were just like, thank you for asking. Yes, like we've been ready for this. Like, let's go. So it just became a matter of going through the spreadsheet. Chibbi was fantastic with those. Like when Chibbi's on a mission, he creates the best spreadsheets.
The deadline to register to vote was 2 weeks away.
Yeah.
So we had to get it done in 2 weeks, period. Around it, there was no debating, there was no waiting on anything. That's the hard deadline, because not only did we want to get it done so that we could have it out before election day, but we also wanted to host a virtual show, a virtual reading, to help drive up, the sales so we can donate to Move Texas, but also drive up the importance of going to register to vote if you're not. Because again, I did the deep dive. I went to the Secretary of State website to find out what's the percentage of registered voters historically versus the percentage of the voting age population, and then what percentage of those vote, and it is debilitatingly low. So that's why the urgency was there. And like Rooster said, like originally we thought like, all right, we only got 2 weeks to do it. Should we just reach out to like 10 to 15 people, see what we get? And I was thinking like, we're probably going to get a 50% response rate. We're asking for too much at such a quick turnaround. Let's just cast a wide net and see what we get, And then 95% of the people like said, yes, we're on board. And what was going to be a 10 poet project turned into a 40 plus poet project. I think they understood the urgency of the moment too. And the tight turnaround made it to where like there was no room to dilly dally, your poems by Friday. And that's where the spreadsheet started happening, which allowed for easy follow-up, who sent what, who hasn't sent what have we already formatted, what's already in the book, whose bio is already there, and then just really just putting the work into it and trying to put it together into a cohesive unit that told the story from beginning to end and wasn't just a collection of poems. We really wanted to kind of elevate what the anthology was as a book itself.
That's awesome. So in terms of like casting your wide net, were there any like parameters? How did you choose these poems? Did you just publish all the poems that the poet sent, or was there like a selection process? Or
we've been doing this long enough to where we're pretty well connected in the Texas circle. So most of these people are people that we actually know, that we're friends with, or we've worked with before, that we knew probably already had material that would fit the subject matter, so we weren't necessarily asking people to like cram out a new poem. They send us a few submissions, and from there we kind of sifted through like, okay, these works really speak to it, and let's go from there. And then we did have a couple of Hail Marys where we're like, we don't know this poet, but we're gonna send an email and see what happens, and hopefully they respond.
Oh, that's awesome. I do know a lot of my friends are like in this book. So I'm very much, when I saw Josh, when I saw Omer, when I saw Eris, I was like, okay, so they already know what's up. And I think Rooster and we were talking about earlier this idea of bringing spoken word poets to the page. And I'm so into that, and how spoken word is translated onto the page and how you can use structure to do that. I know, Chibbi, in your poem, it's very much structured in a way that when I read it in your poems, I was like, I can see you performing this 100%. I can see these breaks. I can see everything and how it should be performed. Can you talk about how that formatting process looked like, taking those really big spoken word poets and trying to put them on the page and do them justice?
So, I mean, it took a little bit of back and forth with some of the poets. Like we did have to become editors in a way. Luckily, like I have enough of a background in sort of page poetry to see I have a much larger background in spoken word poetry, but enough of a background in editing and page poetry to look at a spoken word poet's piece and say, okay, I see what they're doing. I see how this would absolutely work on the stage, but we're on the page now, and we want to maintain that impact while not minimizing, the energy or the voice or turning them into to sound like somebody that they're not. So as we sifted through a lot of the poems, we had maybe like a handful or two who we had to kind of just say, hey, look, these are some of our suggested edits. What do you think? You know, maybe it needs to fit on the page a little bit better. So they were totally receptive. So it was like, we were just floored by how accepting of the whole entire project everyone is. So, you know, poets like Eris and Omer, they were fantastic about just being a part of it and diving in head first with us on a whim. So there wasn't a whole lot of pushback there. And then we were just fortunate enough to get enough page poets like Naomi Shop-Nye, like Buddy Wakefield, and others who kind of blend both being in front of audiences with what exists on the page.
Yeah, and we were lucky enough to where also a lot of the stage poets that we reached out to, like, they've published books before. Just because you know they're most well known in their performance doesn't mean that they don't know how to translate that performance onto a page, you know. So I'm thinking like specifically like the poems the Lacey Roop sent over, the ones Danny Strack and Bill Moran sent over, like those were already formatted in a way where it was like, this is brilliant and thank you. You know, now I just have to copy paste it and make sure that it still looks as good as you originally intended it to, you know? So that's where most of the formatting came in, was just making sure that the intent of the author was still translating when we copy paste and resize the page and all that fun stuff.
I love that. You also separate this book into like 4 parts. We muse, we disdain, we riot, and we dream. Was there a particular reason why you structured it this this way? I just want to talk a little bit about that, and because I really love how it pulls everything together and how each poet kind of shines in their section, because it's so truly like reflecting in that grouping. But I wanted to talk about how that came about.
That was brilliance right there.
It kind of organically happened because, again, we sent out a wide net and didn't put a whole lot of restriction on the kind of content we were looking for. We were like, we're responding to our current political and social climate. You take that, you know, with whatever meaning you want it to take. And as they started to send in their submissions, I started noticing common themes, you know, between the work that was coming in.
Oh, I love that organic weaving. I love it.
So again, spreadsheets. I start to like, all right, so these poems seem to fit under this kind of feel, right? These feel angry. These over here feel introspective. These feel hopeful, you know, like, and so it just allowed us to break it into these chapters that then we organized in the order that we felt would naturally happen. Like, first we have to reflect on the moment, and then we feel the moment, and then we respond to the moment, and then we dream for a better future, right? It's kind of this organic process of dealing with the shit. And so now we had the order of the feelings, and then within each chapter, we also looked at, okay, how does one poem lead into the next? You know, how am I able to connect this one giant feeling into a through line to where we are taking the reader through this process of processing the shit, you know?
That's awesome. Oh, I love all of that. I think the best anthologies, or the best like literature that are culminations of multiple people's work, comes when you don't have restrictions. I think themed things are out completely. Like, what is a theme but just like a loose bracket unto which we are doing things under? And I think the broader the better. It creates a more fluid body of work, and it creates this beautiful book that I'm literally obsessed with. And now, since I have 2 of the poets who are in this book, I do want to talk about craft, and I want to talk about your poems, and kind of how you put them together, because it wouldn't be a defunct interview if we didn't talk about craft. Chibbi, since yours comes first, I think your poems come first. We can talk about it more. The United Corporations of America. I am obsessed. I love how you pulled out a literal section of our Constitution and just broke it down, and you really just read the entire US Constitution, like completely for filth. And I love it. And I really want to talk about what that process looked like of putting this poem together.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back as to when that poem was written, because that poem's a few years old. And it did come, I think it's in the We Disdain section of the book. It did really come from just this moment of disgust and seeing how much priority is being placed on corporations, on big banks, on Wall Street versus people, you know. Now I remember, it was this poem was written when the government shutdowns were happening all those years ago, right? To where it's like, are you fucking kidding me? You have one job, people. You have one job. And so the lack of outrage was astounding to me. And that became even clearer, you know, just looking at how much we distract ourselves so that people don't pay attention to the things. It's like, oh, Washington, that doesn't affect me. Yes, it does. But we're just so comfortable with distracting ourselves, you know, with TV, with whatever, you know. I'm not here just because I watch a ton of TV too, but also just the lack of reaction, you know. And it was just trying to bring light to the fact that this government has abandoned its people. And y'all are not as outraged as you should be about it.
And I love that coming from where you look at when that happened and like where we are now, where outrage is literally how we move through this political space now. It's all about the outrage. It's about the revolution. It's about using technology in a way that's going to help us politically. And just thinking that even this time last year, that wasn't even the case for the world and how we kind of navigated everything. And I think it really, and it's so interesting because it really does fit this time so well. Like I read this and I was like, did he write this year? Because this really does feel like part of this revolutionary movement.
Yeah.
And I love it so much. And the next one, Booty Ho, or where would you rather be sitting, in the Oval Office or on your husband's face? Cracked up laughing the entire time. Oh my God, this poem is great. And I love that it's a response to someone not liking the fact that Pete was gay. And that's like a whole thing, in and of itself. So this poem, all of that.
Yeah, two things. First, to respond to what you were saying about the previous poem, like, did he just write this for this thing? That just leads to the outrage. This poem is 3 or 4 years old and it's still relevant. A poet, Glory B, once said, every poet's wish is for their work to become irrelevant one day. Like, I want to not read this poem anymore because it doesn't apply, but that's not the case. And then 2, Booty Ho. So this was not I think sometimes at like a superficial read, people see this as a diss on Buttigieg, and that's not at all what this poem is.
No.
It is a response to the constant castration of queer men in mainstream media, where, you know, like, they'll accept us to a certain limit, and as long as we don't really talk about what it means to be gay or show public affection or anything like that. And it did happen. It was a news story. Again, I watch the news, I write poetry. It was a news story in the Iowa caucus where a woman voted for Buttigieg and she was being interviewed, and they asked her, you know, like, so you don't, you know, like, the fact that he's gay doesn't bother you, you know, like, that's so awesome that you still voted for him, even though he's a gay man. And she was like, what? He's gay? Can I change my vote? And it's like, no, woman, you can't. So that's really where the critique from this poem was. And I try to be funny in my crassness and vulgarness. But it is that critique of, like, America will only accept queerness in the mainstream to a certain degree, you know? And that's why Buttigieg was able to go as far as he could, is because he's straight passing. For the most part, he is. Yeah. I write it in the poem: clean cut, model citizen, and castrated. Like, he had to acknowledge that it existed and then just put it away and keep living this white picket fence American life in order for people to vote for him. And then when they still found, people that found out that he was gay, which I don't know how you didn't, he was pretty open about it.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden the bigotry and the homophobia come right back up, so that's where that poem came from.
It's just so shocking, and not necessarily shocking, but not even like surprising anymore that people view being LGBTQ, being queer, being like homosexual as just the butt of a joke versus it actually being like a valid form of living. I'm like, we're living in 2020. We've been doing this for decades now. Can we get past the point where this is an issue, right? Where someone's like sexuality, which has nothing to do with you, which doesn't affect your life in any way, shape, or form, can just be an accepted part that doesn't need to be broadcasted even. Like, why is this where the outrage is coming from? You know what I mean? Like, it just,
yeah. To give full credit where credit is due, Rooster came up with the title Booty Ho. We were doing a show with Button Poetry the week of AWP here in San Antonio. And so they asked us to sign these release forms, and it's like, what's the title of your poem? And it didn't have a title at the time. And I was like, Rooster, what do I call this? He's like, Booty Ho. Like, done. Booty Ho it is.
Done. I love the humor that you infuse into your poetry, because they're moments of relief, but also kind of like reiterate your point in such a smart and beautiful way, where I'm like, I'm laughing, but this is serious, and I understand the seriousness of this, but I like that I can laugh through it. I always think comedy is great in writing. Rooster, My Angry Song. Tell me about this one.
That one I wrote during quarantine as a response to a lot of the protesting that was going on after the murder of George Floyd. I remember watching a lot of political pundits, and just like Chibbi, watching a lot of the news and hearing a lot of, just assholes talking about, how you protest the right way, or what does it mean, or, it's a fantastic, sign of solidarity until someone breaks a window. And it just really bothered me in this weird sense. So primarily because I'm like, look, Colin Kaepernick got blacklisted from the NFL for just being quiet on the sideline and kneeling during the national anthem. And, you guys, not you obviously, but, a large chunk of America made life hell for him. So it's like, what is the right way? What is all this? And it made me think about the Woody Guthrie song, This Land Is Your Land, This Land Is My Land, and how much that doesn't fit for so many people. And I went to high school in Killeen, Texas, Coppers Cove, Texas, which is right by Fort Hood. So I kind of have a lot of connections to the military and militarism, and a lot of friends who joined the military, and they're all like people of color. And one of the things that we always argue about is like, how can you do this? Like, how can you take orders and fight for a country that, shits on you a lot of times, or, doesn't give you the credit that it says in the Constitution, or that it says for everyone. So it was a lot of that, just this idea of what actually belongs to us when we use these platitudes, and when we say things like America's the land of the free. It's like, well, for who? Because it's not for women, it's not for LGBTQ, it's not for, Mexican Americans, it's not for Black people, it's not for, many people. So what are we even talking about here? And it just came out that way, and just sort of wove all these different ideas into it together. So
I love how you touch on militarism, specifically within BIPOC communities, because the military literally feeds on lower income BIPOC families. My dad is a Black man from Norfolk, Virginia. Went straight into the Marines at at 17. It was his only option out. And the fact that like this organization, which is so inherently patriotic and nationalistic and literally modern imperialism, is the thing that is the only option for so many people in our country, is just such a contradiction that I can barely wrap my head around, just as a person who grew up with a very militaristic kind of family, who generations of my dad's family were in the military, because that's how you broke out of the hood. That's how you got out of the ghetto, right? No matter even if you're really good at sports, well, everyone else is really good at sports, because we have so little options to break from this kind of ceiling. And so that's why your poem just kind of grabbed me, because I was like, oh, you're touching on a subject that I've been discussing with my family for like decades at this point. So, and then if a Latino calls you a coconut, that means you're brown on the outside, white on the inside. Love that. A loconut is a pejorative I made up that means you're brown on the outside and Donald Trump on the inside. That title, like in and of itself, is a poem, and I love that, and I want to talk about this specific topic, Latinos for Trump, like the idea of being bi POC and pro Trump, and how wild that is.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the last 4 years, I wrote a lot of poems, kind of either lampooning or directly attacking the Trump administration, its policies, whether it was him specifically, whether it was Betsy DeVos and the education department, and Mike, all of them. Like, I don't remember, maybe 2 years ago, I had wrote Local Nuts is kind of the short name for it. And I went up to my friend Travis and I was like, hey, I wrote this poem, I really like it, blah, blah, blah. He's like, is it just another poem about being Mexican and hating Donald Trump? And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, it is, because you know what? We're not done yet, like, absolutely. So this came out, and I love performing this specifically in San Antonio because there's times where there are local nuts in the audience, and you can see them grappling with it themselves. Chibbi and I and another poet, Eddie Vega, we turned it into a group piece. There's video of it. It's taken a lot of different iterations. This is sort of the page version. But yeah, like, I love performing this piece. I love kind of putting it in the laps of Mexican Americans, specifically here in San Antonio, where they have to look at themselves and check their privilege, because here we live in a brown bubble, and a lot of, especially young Mexicanos who go to high school here, who lived here their whole life, they don't realize that just, 45 minutes outside of this city, like, you become a target really quickly. You know what it's like I always kind of say, like, whenever I have conversations about, my Mexicanness or the colorism that also is a big issue in Latinx communities and such, how I fit into that, because I am very white passing. And I just basically say, I'm as white as this country lets me be at any given time, and it's not often. I've grown up in very white areas where they let you know how brown you are and that your last name ends in a Z, and it's this very complicated relationship with the country that I really just like drilling into other Mexican Americans specifically, and young Mexican Americans specifically, to be like, look, assimilation is this kind of pipe dream almost, and it's like, what purpose does it serve? Like, you come from a brilliant, vibrant culture, like, what about this, that makes you feel safe? With the El Paso shooting, that brought it into like humongous contrast, where this individual was activated and just kind of took all this negative Trump energy, this MAGA energy, and drove across the country to commit murder. And what bothered me about that specifically was there was not enough Mexican Americans who felt threatened by it, because it's like, he didn't cross the border and kill Mexicans. He shot American citizens in a Walmart, and like, how do like, San Antonio is full of Mexicanos, and like, we have Walmarts, like, we are literally the same target. We're not that far from the border. Like, don't ever forget that, or don't ever think that the target on your back, though it may be sort of like faded, it's not there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think like Houston, Austin, San Antonio, El Paso, they're such liberal hubs, especially within the last 10 years. You see the movement and the growth of BIPOC within these cities, and you feel so safe, right? Like, I come from a mixed family, and being in Houston, that's not a weird thing. That's a very normal thing, and that's most of Texas. If you walk around, just the amount of refugees we take in, and the amount of diversity because of oil and all the good things that come out of that big business, has created kind of this idea that, oh no, we are safe, we are untouchable in these cities, until you look around and you realize, oh, but outside of our little safety net, our little bubble, we're not safe.
Right.
And people think of Texas as the place where you're not safe. And I'm just like, well, you're not going to the right places. But then I have to step back and think, no, that this is true, which was proven in the election. As much as we were so close, literally points away, because of our big hubs are so blue, literally 3%. Yeah, exactly.
Three. I have spreadsheets.
Literally, yeah. And the fact that our major hubs are rivaling at that degree, but yet you see all the red in those border towns and smaller towns that are outside of these hubs, and you're and then you like step back and think, oh, Texas is still, we still got work to do. Right, and the work is never going to be done. This might have been a record-breaking year for votes, but that doesn't mean that in the next election we don't have to work twice as hard to maintain that. And I think that this book is such a great and clear representation of that work that still needs to be done. Right, like this is good. Like where we're at is good and we're getting better, but this is not over. And this is a battle that we constantly have to, this is the dream that we have to fulfill, literally. And just, I can't talk enough about how much I love this book, and the fact that it came out of such a small period of like coming together, I think is what makes me love it more. I'm like, because you can have the biggest, longest plans for a project, but getting down into it and actually putting it together, I think that's what makes it so great. Is this was a brainchild that came to fruition within just a couple of weeks. And I love it. To the point of, 2 years from now, when the next major national election happens, we have to work twice as hard. Like, again, 2 years from now, I hope this book is irrelevant. It probably won't be, though, so. But we can only hope and pray that eventually this will be irrelevant.
Yeah, we tried to use it to capture a snapshot in time, like what it feels right now in this moment, but I'm sure 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, there will still be some semblance of truth in this if we don't keep up the fight, if we don't continue to raise our voices and use them, and to quote Rooster when we were talking about this, to put our art where our activism is, I think is what you said.
Are there any plans in the future to like continue this as a series, or is this like a one-off?
We mentioned doing Contra Part 2, and I think for me, I would love to do a second book or multiple books, because like the response was fantastic to this from all the poets, and again, thank you to them who donated their poems to this. I got to like reach out to Naomi Shab Nye, who's an icon and one of my heroes who I love. Chibbi can attest to that. I was geeking hard. He was geeking hard about Buddy Wakefield. Like we really were able to make this dream project a reality. But in terms of making a second one, or multiple, there's still so many amazing poets that Texas has that we either couldn't reach out to, or they couldn't be a part of this book for a number of reasons. And I would love to. It didn't feel like a labor of love because it was so fast, but to do it again, how do we sort of new ideas? We'd have to sit and really think about it. So,
well, if you ever do, y'all, please do it, because this is just great, and I think it's really a testament to not just this election, but this year. Like this very much feels like a 2020 all wrapped up, and the fact that it came out this year and not like next year, after the year is over, really speaks to where we're moving forward. That yes, although this is happening right now, that doesn't mean that we have to live in it and that we can't reflect now. And I think that that's such a huge thing, that the reflection is coming at the same time as the action, right? And how that kind of changes even poetry. And I wanted to, if y'all give me like a couple more minutes, I want to talk a little bit about just activism and what it looks like in the poetry community in Texas today. If y'all could speak to how y'all work it in San Antonio and how that kind of looks in your community.
I think it's especially difficult right now because of the pandemic, where it's like, how much do you put yourself out there while still remaining safe? I think it starts with the personal connections, the one-on-ones, right? It's I was interviewing Adam Faulkner a couple weeks ago, and asked him about his activism, and he said, you know, it isn't about moving 3s to 10s. It's about moving 3s to 5s, right? And 5s to 7s. It's these incremental movements that over time end up making the big difference, because you're not going to flip someone like that, but you can start to move the mark little by little. And so it starts with the personal connections, and then supporting the organizations that are doing the work. You know, the organizations already exist. They just need help to continue to function. You don't need to start something from scratch yourself. You know, find an organization that has the same mission as you, help them, whether you're volunteering, whether you're phone banking, whether you're donating, whatever, however you can, because not all activism looks the same, you know, and just because you can't be out in the street marching does not mean that you know, writing your governor or you donating $10 isn't just as important as the people that are physically out there fighting.
Yeah.
I completely agree. So sorry about my dog in the background. But this idea that activism starts from one person talking to another person, we've seen such a revolution of young people literally fighting with their families about, it's just like, I'm not out there and being there physically as much as I should be, or as much as I want to be, because that's not feasible in this time, but I can sit down with that one relative that just doesn't get it and try and make them get it. I think that is such a testament to what activism is today.
Idea of, you know, moving 3s to 5s. You're not going to convince a Trump supporter to vote Democrat. You know, like that's a long shot. But can you convince a Trump supporter that his ideals maybe don't align with the traditional ideals of the Republican Party, right? Yeah. Can you start to move them slowly in a direction that's at a pace that's comfortable for them? Because if you're trying to flip them to vote for Bernie Sanders, like, that's just not happening. No. You're just yelling at each other, you know?
Rooster, I would love your thoughts.
That was a great answer, Chibbi. I think for me, I'll just kind of say, I'll work backwards. Like, on a macro level, like, poetry and activism, I think, is important in the sense that, for me, all art combats cynicism. And I think that is the biggest cause for disenfranchisement of communities, of individuals, from to even engaging in the process of voting or being involved in civics. And I don't blame people who don't, because it is a violent and oppressive system that they're engaging with. You know, the local governments, the federal governments have done a lot to oppress, you know, millions and millions of people. So for any individual to kind of want to actively engage with that, it takes a whole lot of courage. So poetry, art fights that cynicism, and it sort of emboldens people to take those steps or feel like they're not alone. So that's how I feel about art, poetry, and activism in that sense. In terms of locally, I think San Antonio, we do a really good job of not trying to just keep our niche within our niche. We reach out to other groups. I know with the organization that we run, Write Art Out, and then with like our Words and Shit virtual talk show, we try to expand the conversation. We try to include more people and different organizations in the mix with us, and let them know, like, hey, we're not just artists who are doing this for our own gratification. We're doing this because we're community members, and we want to create something beautiful or something that maybe challenges other people's ideas, and we want to partner. We're also very, very cognizant of like the space that we fill. So anytime we do a partnership, we're very aware of making sure that we match their mission statements, but also that we provide artists and poets and people who match their organization. So like, you know, I would never like step to the forefront with like an LGBTQ organization as a cis hetero male and be like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. Like we have plenty of poets. So it's knowing also how to like the space that you fill and then leaving space for someone else to really come through and shine and then supporting them fully. So we do a lot of things like that specifically to locally here in San Antonio so that the community expands and expands. Something my father kind of taught me, and he got it from somewhere else, I don't remember, but he said, you know, you have your circle of influence and your circle of concern. And he was like, the problem is too many people focus on the circle of concern and a lot of things get lost in the mix. And he said, as long as you focus on your circle of influence, what you can actually change and what you can actually do, it begins to grow and your influence grows. So for me, sometimes it's just like, I want to do more. I want to go to, you know, drive to Washington and be there in the march. But I can't because I want to respect quarantine. I want to do all these things. So sometimes it's just, hey, Chibbi, like, let's put a book together.
Yeah.
I love that. So in terms of wrapping up, some upcoming stuff for you guys, you put in the Words and Shit virtual talk show. Are there new episodes? Like, where can we find that? Can we give the people what they want?
Yeah, so that was something that we started back when the quarantine first happened, and we were like, well, what are we going to do, because we can't have open mics anymore? Like, how do we continue to bring people together and raise up poetry? And so we started a weekly virtual talk show that was airing on the Right Art Out Facebook page. So we actually just wrapped up the season. We went from April to last week, not taking a week off. So all of those are on the Right Art Out Facebook page. I'm working on uploading them to the Words and Shit YouTube page that we just created, but it's also available via podcasts. So anywhere that you find podcasts, you can search for Words and Shit. And we've got, like I said, more than 30 interviews with poets from all walks of life, page, stage, you know, just beginning, fully established, from names like Adam Faulkner to Ed Mabry to I don't even remember, to Lupe Mendez.
Yeah. Like, love Lupe.
And Jasmine. We got them both. On a break for the holidays. We'll be back in January. But the purpose of the show is to get to know the person behind the poetry. So if you want to go find out more about the writers and poets that you love, go look up the podcast or the YouTube page and, you know, watch them. They are phenomenal conversations. They share some poetry and then we just talk for 40 minutes.
Thank you both for being with me today in this conversation. I loved it. This was a beautiful hour from a horrible week that I really needed this. And this is really great. And thank you for joining me on this Zoom call.
No, thank you for having us.